I was born in Galloway, I was reared in Galloway, we'll a rocht for Galloway, and it's there I'll die. But in atween the twa, mony a gloamin', mony a daw, mony a drink and mony a threen, he partnered me in Galloway. I was born in Galloway, I was reared in Galloway, we'll a rocht for Galloway, and it's there I'll die. Mony a stag hour, mony a mile, mony a crack and mony a smile, mony's the change that I hae seen in my time in atween. Oh, I was born in Galloway, I was reared in Galloway, we'll a rocht for Galloway, and it's there I'll die. Oh. So that was a song by Logan Patterson of New Galloway. And I put the tune to it. He had made it as a poem, but he also made songs. And I really like it. It says what matters. He was born here, he lived here, he's going to die here, he's worked here, he feels known. And the repetition, I was born, we'll a rocht, I worked here, and there I'll die. So although it's a short song, it's a really nice sort of life story in a way of someone who really felt he belonged here. And that's partly what this evening is about.
Indeed. Indeed. Now, the poem I'm going to be reading from this book of poems, Ghosts at Play, poems from rural Japan. And I wrote these poems after a visit to Japan to Tottery Theatre to perform with at Bird Theatre, The Village and the Road. And they asked if I would write and sort of commissioned a book of poems about rural Japan. And the poems were based on field work that I did there. They were based on interviews with people while I was there, and also online interviews that I did there. And Ghosts at Play, the title comes from a series of haiku called Crops. And it's this one is, what can save the crop of schools that yield no children? Only ghosts at play. And Bird Theatre in Tottery, Japan, is a transformed old school in the same way that Catstrand is. I'm going to begin reading a poem called The Village Dance, and the details for the village dance are mostly drawn from an anthropological study of a Japanese village published in 1938, and a series of Japanese watercolors of people walking through snow. The village dance. The threshing was done, and the village, deep in snow, was a creature of its own desires. They walked from their houses over the snow, the only sounds, straw boots, the creak of snow weighing on arms of pine. Were there many of them? More than a handful. They met in a house where much sake was taken. Outside, the night was dark, the moon sketched over the snowy ground. Why the song began when it did was something to do with the sake, a rough old song it was that shouldered aside the silence. Someone produced a shamisen. It was time for the room to dance. As the company clapped, two men are first on the floor. Their dance moves mimic their lives, the back-breaking work of weeding, the way bodies jackknife as they wield a flail. Two women join them, housewives, for only they have license. They thrust their hips forward in a challenge, One of the men grabs a stick and holds it between his thighs. Some urge the women on, adding their own verses to the song. Laughter, more sake. Children peer from the doorways while a mother sits, neither out nor in, nursing her youngest child. But one man there has had his fill. Alone at the fire pit in the kitchen, he smokes his pipe, picks at a bowl of rice. Who can drink more after a bowl of rice? He tells himself, remember the smell of cedar, sweet and rich as it turns to ash. Remember the words of a rough old song, let memory be engraved with voices. He steps outside, a few steps more, and the dancing room becomes part of another world. What has become of me, he asks, as he presses his lonely way through the snow. Where's my breath gone? There are no lights in the houses. Who lived where? He wonders, licking the absent sake from his lips.
When I read that poem and talked to Tom about it, the phrase I loved was the dancing room. And as you can see, I brought my fiddle and I played for dancing, and I grew up here going to dances, and indeed some of us are going to one tonight. But the village hall and bigger spaces like that in the Glen Kens have not been the only places where people danced, and the house was a very important place for parties, particularly amongst the hill community in the past. And in the winter time, it was common for them to go to parties in each other's houses over the winter. And for me, I love this idea of a moment, the smell, the sounds, where in that moment everybody's together dancing with the music. And it made me think of this song, the Wadden Spree, which I learned from an old shepherd here. And it's probably a 19th century song because it mentions the cholera. So it's an old song, but to me it brings to life this wedding in the house where dancing was only one of the things that happened, as you will hear. Now, friends, you'll be wondering what I'm doing here. That I'll tell ye if you'll only lend an ear. You'll no be surprised when I tell ye true. I'm a member o' the Merit Men's Society noo. 5 year I courted bonny Maggie Brown, then she consented to be Mrs. Cahoon. Of course, all my pals to the spree I did invite, and without exaggeration, we spent a happy night. There was eating and drinking and all sorts of fun. When yin tear ended, another yin begun. We spent a jolly nicht as happy as could be, and I'm glad you're a present at my waddin' spree. To start first the business, to supper we sat doon. All that was for eating disappeared pretty soon. Roast beef and onions, oh each we had a cram, and then we had a tightener, oh a fourpenny ham. After the supper we read up the flare, and into the dancing as hard as we could tear. The dancers were sae numerous, the hoose was rather sma', and to gie them mair room, we took the paper off the wa'. There was eating and drinking and all sorts of fun. When yin tear ended, another yin begun. We spent a jolly nicht as happy as could be, and I'm glad you're a present at my waddin' spree. Now, after the dancing, a sang or twa was wanted. The first ane to start was deficient o' a lung. He tried to raise his voice, but it wasna ony use, and he nearly gied the cholera to abody in the hoose. The next ane to start was Big Carter Wall, a big strapping fully wi' a voice like a bull. Now, I've heard mony singers, but I'll tell 'ee plain, I would rather suffer matrimony than hear him again. There was eating and drinking and all sorts of fun. When yin tear ended, another yin begun. We spent a jolly nicht as happy as could be, and I'm glad you're a present at my waddin' spree. Now, for me, that song is about a very particular kind of activity in a particular place. And even although I wasn't there, I can envisage this room coming to life with the dancers and so on. And I think this is important. It's more than just a place. As we know, many of these houses, many of the small schools, places like that are now gone. But in those walls, these things happened and people lived and socialized and worked together. So it's, for me, songs are like a door into that life, which is, you know, certainly part of history, but a doorway that puts you in the room, in the dancing room.
Yes. And well, that was a very dancing room that you sang about there, Joe. And I think the similarities between the village dance and the Wadden spree is really what we're about this evening. We're about just giving things that bounce off each other and that talk to each other. And one of the ideas which animated us was this idea from a geographer, Marcus Dole, I think is pronounced the name, that the difference between hollowed ground and hallowed ground, that hollowed ground, he says, has been drained of meaning by violence and history. Hallowed ground is filled with meaning that has been infused by tradition, ritual, tales, legends, and agreed memories. I would say that hallowed ground can also be infused by the creative imagination, and that there are lots of things on maps, or that are important for maps, that are actually absent from maps. And part of these is the intangible culture you were talking about, that can often be erased. And this next poem that I'm going to read is called The Vow. And rural life at a basic level is quite similar everywhere. If you go into, when I was going into villages in Japan with very few people in them, you'd still see the stacked wood in exactly the same way as you'd see lots in farming communities in Europe. And stacking wood and drawing water are two very common things everywhere. It's said that Irish wives used to spend 1/3 of their lives fetching water. And the Irish marriage promise, they said, was to love, obey, and draw water. And in lots of ways, this is still largely the case in many parts of the world. And one of the tragedies of climate change is that women and children need to go further and further to find the water. So this is a vow. I've called it a children's poem. Who is chopping wood and stacking logs? Grandpa is chopping wood and stacking logs. He made a marriage vow many years ago to love, cherish, and to chop wood and stack it. Who is helping Grandpa to keep his promise? I am helping Grandpa to keep his promise. Who is now chopping wood and stacking it? I alone am chopping wood and stacking it. Who is drawing water and carrying the bucket? Grandma is drawing water and carrying the bucket. She made a marriage vow many years ago to love, cherish, and to draw and carry water. Who is helping Grandma to keep her promise? I am helping Grandma to keep her promise. Who is now chopping wood and drawing water? I alone am chopping wood and drawing water. For all these years ago, there was no promise to be made except to the wood and the water. And following on from these old traditions is a poem called The Charcoal Burners. And the charcoal burners in Japan used to keep the forests clear. They sort of looked after the forests, cleared them out, and so that if you go to Japan now, the forests are impenetrable. And the word Satoyama was the idea of the forest cleared out for beneficent growth. And charcoal burners were regarded with suspicion in Europe and in Japan because they lived on the fringes of villages. And people also thought that there was something sort of magical about what they did. And when the charcoal burning stopped, Alistair Reid, who lived in a village in Mallorca, told me that when the charcoal burning stopped, the charcoal burners stopped having a reason to work and to take the charcoal into the villages, and gas, these little gas stoves, took care of that and were largely responsible for the depopulation in these villages. The charcoal burners. Century after century, little changed. They lived on the edge of the village, close to the forest. They felled, cut, and carried, often a tree stacked on one back, down to their stone or wooden kilns. And where they harvested, light fell. Mushrooms and flowers fed. The work itself was half muscle, half the divination of an artist, a skilled reading of smoke, fire, and water. A purification, but also a brush with darkness. Between the known world and the wilderness, there was suspicion. There were stories to be told. Watch them now, loading charcoal into the great baskets that loom over their heads as they set off to the scattered villages they fuel. How innocent they appear in their sure-footedness. They cannot know that soon they will be in the past, a ghostly presence in folk tales and grainy photographs. For kerosene and gas will spread more fiercely than the blue flames of charcoal ever could. Being in the past, they will have to leave their villages and go to towns where their burdens cannot be so easily laid down. In the forests, their elegy shall be a gathering darkness, an impoverished spring.
I was interested in that poem because of the craft involved in a task like that. And once that line of work disappears, people forget just what those everyday skills would have been. And it made me think of a song that I collected in the Glen Kens called The Shepherd's Song. Now, of course, there are still shepherds around here, but not nearly as many as there used to be. And I'm reflecting, Tom, that in fact shepherds often led very solitary lives in the upland hills here in the Glen Kens, and they also moved around a lot because they were employed by farmers, and they would, until about the Second World War, they would often be in one place for 6 months and another, so they had a lot of time to think. And I heard about this song, and I was talking from the 80s onwards, I was talking to very elderly shepherds who just said, oh, that old shepherd's song. In a way, time was already passing, but I was very curious about it, and I managed to collect various fragments. And it's called The Shepherd's Song, or I Wish the Cal East Wind Would Never Blow. And I love it because it has this specific terminology, as you'll hear, about the craft of shepherding. I'm a shepherd, and I rise ere the sun is in the skies. I can climb the hill wi' ony o ye a'. I like my flock to feed, to look fresh and fair indeed. But I wish the cal east wind would never blaw. I can smear my sheep and dip, I can yedder lock and clip, I can lamb the ewes wi' ony o ye a'. I can puddock, I can twin, aye, and cheat them wi' the skin. But I wish the cal east winds would never blaw. So I have to explain that udderlock is pulling the wool off round about the ewes' udders so that the lambs can suck. And puddock is getting a ewe to accept a lamb that's not its own, and the same with twinning, I can keel, marking it, or mark or speen, that's weaning a lamb, I can drive them to the train, though their dams be rinnin' bleatin' in a raw. I can stand the market through, aye, and recht we'll sell them too, and my measter siller safely fetch it a'. I can smear my sheep and dip, I can yedder lock and clip, I can lamb the ewes wi' ony o' ye a'. I can puddock, I can twin, aye, and cheat them wi' the skin, but I wish the caul east winds would never blaw. Now, neighbour herds, beware, if ye gang to show or fair, yon fiery liquor never taste of a'. But thole and thole a wee, till your ain braw hills you see, and the bonny babbling streams'll quench it a'. I can smear my sheep and dip, I can yedder lock and clip, I can lamb the ewes wi' ony o' ye a'. I can puddock, I can twin, I can cheat them wi' the skin, but I wish the caul east winds would never blaw. Now when my work is done, though the nicht be e'er sae dark, tae my bonny lass I'll gently ca'. Oh, she's the braw yin, she's the best beneath the sun, and she'll name the day will be nae langer twa. I can smear my sheep and dip, I can yedder lock and clip, I can lamb the ewes wi' ony o' ye a'. I can puddock, I can twin, aye, and cheat them wi' the skin, but I wish the caul east winds would never blaw.
When I saw that Joe was going to sing that song, I thought I could make one change and read a poem that's not from the Japanese, the book about Japanese experience. And this is a poem called Galloway Tale. And I can't remember where I read. It's probably anecdotal, but I must have read it in some local information someplace. And it's about an old shepherd and how he rarely came down. They rarely came down to the villages, and they would come down for market or to get a wife. And this talks about the time when Gaelic was still known in the region, and places were named after Gaelic, and the first Ordnance Survey map people were coming out and they were asking these old shepherds the names of things, and the shepherds gave the dirtiest names they could think of, and the maps were all printed before they realised it. So this is Galloway Tale. He told the map men anything, but in Gaelic. That stretch of bog, old woman's Fanny. The small rise, Mary's tit. The maps were all printed before he was rumbled, an aging hill shepherd. What did he want of the outside world? Provisions, perhaps, tools, a wife. Each market day for 2 years he wooed her, his fistfuls of violets bound up with wool, till, drunk as a lord, after the market, after the wedding, he took her back to the bald hills, the gurgling sounding places. Years later, children were seen, fetching water from dark pools, cupping curlew's eggs. It said they fixed you with brown eyes, sharp as kestrels, hovered momentarily, and were gone behind a line of dogs conjured from the green ruff around the thick-walled bothy. A slum in the heather, so some saw it, black pans lying unscoured, ropes of washing rotting in damp piles. When she died, he carried her over the hills, over the burns on his back. At her graveside in the rain, he mourned on alone, while in the pub they put on prim cartographer faces and muttered that the loneliness of earth would suit her. Now, can I say, I'd thought that the naming, the central sort of comedy, was simply a case of disruption from the shepherds until I read very recently of the time when women were presented as spirits of the earth in stories which originated in eras when the landscape was symbolized as a woman's body, caves as wombs, rivers as veins, hills as breasts. So there may have been an element of truth in what the old shepherds were saying. Doesn't make such a good story.
Tom and I talked about the hollowed and hallowed ground imagery, and I too have been interested in geography recently, and particularly cultural geography. And they have a thing called deep mapping. And I know there's been a lot of interest in maps, both in the Glen Kens and across Dumfries and Galloway generally, and old names for fields and places. And deep mapping is about layers of meaning over time, so that what we see of a place today or what we hear is only one snapshot in this moment. But in fact, if you're interested in these sorts of things, as I am, you have questions about what came before it. So one of the features of the landscape round here, of course, is rivers and bridges. And before I play this tune, one of the nice things about traditional music is a lot of songs and tunes are named for people and places. So they provide lots of clues as to who lived where and what they did. And this is a tune called the Ken Bridge, which is for your local bridge. And I know there was a bicentenary, was that right? A couple of years ago. And there are other tunes for other bridges here. And of course, it must have been a huge event in the lives of people who one day couldn't, and then the next day could cross the river. This is a fairly recent tune by a musician called Graham Barber, who comes from Kirkbean. And he's a box player, not a fiddler, but he's written a few tunes for the Glen Kens, and I thought I'd play the Ken Bridge. I believe that it was on the wall, framed and on the wall of the Ken Bridge Hotel in Dave Patterson's time there. So here we go with the Ken Brig, and it's kind of a waltz.
This next poem, very short, a poem called Rice, and it speaks of the sense of community, which is a feature of much of the work we've been presenting. And this poem is simply really a transcription of what my guide and interpreter, Etsu, said to me when we were going around the villages. Rice. Etsu tells me it is a shame on you living in the country to buy your own rice. What is wrong with you? Do you have no patch of ground? Living where she does, in a fishing village, it is the same when it comes to fish. What is wrong with you? Have you no friends? What you must never do, Etsu tells me, is to say no. If you do, there will be no further offers to refuse. And this is a poem called Harvest, which shows the importance of festivals and pride that there is in farming, harvest. In early autumn, persimmon fruits like orange lanterns light the tree. The rice field stands to alert in spite of the recent storm. A man, like the crow in the painting by Hoitsu, plucks at the finest fruit. By the river in sunshine, families tend to their graves. My most distant wife, picture me with this rich juice running down my chin, and meet the farmer happy to share his harvest of light.
I love that. And of course, harvest is still an important time of year and an anxious time of year for farmers. My dad, as some of you may know, was the minister in Dalry, and I remember the timing of the harvest festival service in church was always an anxious time, because he couldn't have that service until enough of the harvest had been gathered in. So that was always a bit precarious. But of course, for shepherds and sheep farmers, the harvest was a bit different. You might be sending sheep to slaughter, but you were also gathering wool. And that might be an equivalent task, a collective task, which before the days of electric shears was something that needed a lot of labour. And this next song is called the Bachts on a Creach. And a Creach is a farm up the Forest Glen, and the Bachts is where they would take the sheep to shear them. And it's another song by Logan Patterson, and he was very interested in older farming practices, and he would often talk to older shepherds and farmers about how things used to be. And what he really loved about it was the sense of community, because it wasn't just about getting the job done. It was about the crack, it was about the jokes, it was about the songs and the stories, and it was about the food and, you know, long hard days. But of course, if you helped at one farm one day, then those people would help you at your farm the next day. So it was spread over a period of time. And one of the reasons I think that traditional songs and tunes lend themselves to marking these things is that it's portrayed as a collective tradition. That's something that people join in together, whether they're dancing or playing a tune together. So this is a lovely song, and you could see it as nostalgic, but I think it's also celebratory of this moment. And he mentions specific people who was there, and for me that stops it being a sentimental song, because it's a moment in time. Wheel upon the moor where the laverick does sing, and the peeweed does cry and sough with its wing, and the whoppet does hang fae the threads o' the wind. There you'll find the Bachts on a Creach, the Bachts on a Creach, the Bachts on a Creach, close by to the rims o' the kells. Bring memories to me o' a fine Glenken's clip. I rocked in the Bachts on a Creach. The harsel was gathered in the early morn, and all o' the ewes were to be hand shorn. 'Twas a privilege to work at na Creach yon day, and be part o' that time-honoured neighbourly way. Weel, Davy Fifarsky, he bolted to me, and I placed a yow by each stool clipper's knee, and Jimmy McQuan brought fleeces sae weel, and tramped them in the bag at Knockreach. The Bachts on a Creach, the Bachts on a Creach, close by to the rims o' the kells. Bring memories to me o' a fine Glenken's clip. I rocked in the Bachts on a Creach. We rocked fae sunrise till nicht time at 9, till 40 score years o' their fleeces were done, and weary were all that slept in the brae, that rocked yon day lang at no creach. Yen day I'll return to yon bachs yonce again, where now all the shearing is done by machine. Nae mair jolly neighbours gain a helping hand. It's a gey lonely day at na creach. The bach's on a creach, the bach's on a creach, close by tae the rims o' the kells. Bring memories to me o' fine Glencairn's clip. I rocked in the bach's on a creach.
This next poem, Islanders, looks at the depopulating villages in Japan and St Kilda. One of the issues when you lose a population is that there aren't the people to perform the rituals that there used to be, and so you can't carry out these rituals. And St Kilda, one of its reasons for the abandonment was that they didn't have enough men to launch a boat. And one of the saddest last actions that they did was they drowned all their working dogs. So this is a poem called Islanders. The festival took place at the shrine. Before it began, 3 women visited each household. They danced to entertain the gods and to wish for a good harvest. They brought colour, movement, and music. They drew the shadows from each house. Now there is only one dancer left in the village. The festival is one with the shadows. There is a sadness felt for every loss. St Kilda lies far from here in the North Atlantic Ocean. When the number of men on the island fell below those strong enough to launch the boat, the one they fished from, the one that connected them to the other world, the old life was considered no longer tenable, and a decision, theirs, was made to abandon the island. Their last vivid act was to drown the working dogs in the harbour. Hard and unpredictable as life had been, it was widely reported there was not a dry eye among the 36 islanders as they watched from the harebell the outline of their island home fade from view. In this village there is drift, but as yet no abandonment. Though 26 years have passed since a nappy was hung on a line, this is relayed with a wry acceptance rather than despair. The villagers continue to worship at the shrine, and in place of the old tradition of the dance that once helped to bind them, the strengths that keep them afloat have little to do with roles, but rather with which ways they can be useful. Like islanders, each of them brings an offering, and their servitude is given freely one to the other, as are the steps in a dance. We just make a comment there about this village where I heard this, where it had been 26 years since a nappy was hung in the line. And this is happening not just in Japan, but in all over Europe. I read an article very recently about a village in Japan, in Italy, where a baby was born, and it's like, you know, the Magi all over again. You know, everybody comes to see the baby and to hold the baby, and to you know, the baby gives joy. So anyway, that's
New life, yeah.
Yeah, new life.
I suppose what I feel is that the land is the land, and it has its challenges and it will change, but people as long as people are able to be on the land, they will make sense of it and make a life for themselves in their own time. And so I don't live in the Glen Kens at the moment, but I'm in close touch with people who do, and I'm very interested in the trajectory of lives in this area over a long time. And I'm aware of new songs being made for things that concern people here now. Two examples would be one for the Mullach in Dalry, made by Susan Belinsky, Tormentil, Eyebright, Time. It's called, a lovely little song, which is challenging plans, I think, to spray the Mullach with pesticide or something, which would threaten the wildlife on the hill. So that's a very active thing. Sweet wee song. It goes, Tormentil, Eyebright, Time, Tormentil, Eyebright, Time. The windchat rests its weary wings over Tormentil, Eyebright, Time. And apart from being a lovely line, Tormentil, Eyebright, Time, which makes you want to go and look up what those flowers are and make sure you know what they are and what the windchat is. It's a kind of incantation, I think, that kind of chanting or repetition of it. And another one would be the song that some Dalry folk made for Waterside Hill where we're walking tomorrow morning with Andy and Angela, and where, you know, the plan to cover that with trees was challenged and discussed, and a song was part of that campaign. So I think it's important to take heart that populations change, work changes, but as long as we're able to live in these places and engage with decision making around them, then we can live in them. And I wanted to sing a song called Seasons, which to me is about how the land remains, the seasons turn, even as folk move on and generations change. And it's another one which has a repetition in it. The refrain is a tween Balgerin and Balmagee, so further up Loch Hen. And it's a poem by Willie Neal, who Tom will remember, who lived in Crossmichael for many years when he retired, and wrote some lovely Scots, English and Gaelic poems. And this is a poem of his that I put to music. It's just called Seasons. Ski was the heart i' the spring o' the year, when the wheels on yard be good to steer, and the plewlands promise glen thee a twin Balgerin and Balmagee. The lang-het simmer come and rode the hill Glen Kens in a glen to goud, and the ganging fit on the hill gate free, a twin Balgerin and Balmagee. Hirst and the corn ricks flusk to the wind like a rinning sea o' the soothing sun, and ilka mead paid its fee, a twin Balgerin and Balmagee. Now the 1 year's done, and the drim grouse stye, and the snarlicks call our cairns more wye, and the cranrachs lyre on ilka tree, a twin Balgerin and Balmagee, a twin Balgerin and Balmagee.
It's wonderful how well that poem works as a song. It's wonderful. This is my last poem that I'm going to read, and it's called Lullaby. In depopulating areas, obviously the survival of lullabies is always interesting and always under threat. And Etsu, my guide and interpreter, told me when I asked her about lullaby, she said, well, the most popular one, everybody knows this one in Tottery in this area. And it begins, where's your nanny gone? Over the mountains to her parents' home. What will she bring you? A small drum and a bamboo flute. So I thought, well, I can play with that. So this is Lullaby. Where's your nanny gone? Over the mountains to her parents' home. What will she bring you? A small drum and a bamboo flute. Where's your horse gone? Across the fields and far away. What will she bring you? The exhilaration of her hot breath. Where's your table gone? To jump over fences with the horse. What will it bring you? Its newfound confidence. Where's your bogeyman gone? He's walked backwards into sunlight. Strange. What will he bring you? A rusty old nail. Where's your dragon gone? To feel at ease with its own kind. What will it bring you? A cave of darkness, a tongue of fire. Where's your shogun gone? To the unruly limits of empire. What baubles will he bring you? Oh, the usual pomp, fear, uncertainty, hatred. Where have your old gods gone? Wherever gods go, I do not know. What will they bring you? I've asked for the earth and the sky and for a surprise. Where's your future gone? My future's gone ahead. What will it bring you? It will bring only what I make of it. Where's your nanny gone? Over the mountains to her parents' home to fetch a small drum and a bamboo flute. Now please, let me sleep. This, can I just say these poems were all translated by Nao Mayuchi into Japanese, and which is why I sometimes get a bit lost in turning the pages. So
You don't read Japanese,
no,
Tom?
no, but I tell you, my Japanese looks terrific. I look much better in Japanese.
Okay, I'm going to finish in a minute with a tune. I just wondered if there was anything we wanted to say to kind of wrap up the theme.
Well, I just think what we said, the you know, that whole thing of things being absent from maps is as of printed maps is as much of interest, as much relevance
Yes.
as what's there.
Yeah.
And I think that the stories of places are made by the things that are written about them and sung about them. If you were to talk about Loch Inver, the story of Loch Inver, for example, on the northwest of Scotland, you know, you might talk about a Sint, you might talk about clearances, you might talk, but you'd also talk about the poetry of Norman McCaig, and because that's part of the story. So I think how we respond to things, and you know, hallowing them by paying attention. You're hallowing them.
Yeah, these remain to be engaged with and talked about and shared. And it's amazing how long these things last. I do all sorts of different research into manuscripts, into printed sources, but I spent, like Tom said about his fieldwork in Japan, what I really like is sitting down with people and having a crack. And this last tune is one which was made by a shepherd called Robbie Murray, who used to live up the Forest Glen. And I visited him a lot in the 1980s and recorded his playing. And he was one of the last of those sort of shepherds who'd lived fairly remote lives. And he'd got his fiddle out after it had been in the byre for a number of years, and he'd started playing it again, but he didn't really have many friends to visit with and play, so he enjoyed a crack, and he told me he'd written this tune. It's called Mulwarcher, which is of course one of the runes of Kells, and I was interested in that because when I was a teenager growing up here, my mum was very active in a campaign against British nuclear fuels, proposal to do some test boring in Mulwarcher, which is a granite hill, to see if they would dump low-level nuclear waste there. So my childhood, my young adulthood was, you know, a political education in that. And Robbie said to me, he'd kind of clocked that this was going on, and he thought, I used to herd that hill. I knew that hill. I walked all over that hill. So his experience was walking on it in the snow, herding sheep, you know, huge distances. This is before quad bikes. They had to go a long way. And, you know, he was thinking, well, there's another story about that hill, and he made a tune for it. So I thought I'd play that for you. And the fiddle was a very common instrument amongst shepherds, and it was there was one on the wall in many shepherds and farmers' houses, and you wouldn't need to play many tunes, but it would be there if somebody wanted to take it down and have a dance. And I've still got Robbie's fiddle, which is very precious. It's not this one, but here's my whacker.
Thank you very much for listening to us. And thank you very much, Jill. That was a joy.
Thank you. Lovely.
This is being so good and so quiet, class. I have a gift. The moth trap, this poem which I read, The Galloway Tale, is the book that I've written that most hallows the landscape around here, and I'd like to give you each a copy.
Oh.